This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, welcome to A Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and this is episode 146. And today we're going to be talking about remote work with the CTO from Doist. But before we get into that, I want to thank our sponsor, Splashtop. At Splashtop, they allow you to do remote work very easily. You can remote into machines, computers. I've been using the product personally for 7 years and at our company for 4 years now. And we use it to remote into different desktops when employees are remote, when they need support. Our help desk team uses it, which is really awesome, especially when your CEO is calling and they have trouble printing. You can remote in, take care of it, fix the problem, which is fantastic. We also use it to remote into other systems that would typically require us to physically be there. You can do remote printing. You can work on a Mac, PC, iOS, which is really, really cool. I really love the fact that their software will allow you to do that thing. And it also allows you to print remotely, which is another feature, especially if you're an accountant or something, or you're working on your taxes for your small business and you need to print your 1099s, your W-2s. You can do that remote print work directly from Splashtop's interface, which is awesome. And don't forget, you can save 20% and get a free month trial by going to geekleader.com/splashtop. Again, that's geekleader.com/splashtop. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I've got Gonçalo Silva, and he is the CTO at Doist. Gonçalo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, John.
So I really wanted to get started just to lay some context for our listeners, and I do this with pretty much every guest. I want to just talk about kind of how you got started in technology, what your passions are, and kind of where you started, and all the way up to where you are now, just so we have some context for the conversation going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I fell in love in computers when I was about 9 years old. That was the first time I had ever seen a computer in my life, and I was just amazed about, how much you could do with just a tiny box and a tiny screen. And from then on, I decided I wanted to, pursue computer science. I went to college. Midway through college, I just started working in tech. So I was working in a company building a product. I've always been fond of that area of technology, building products. There's just so much you can do in this area, but building products was always kind of like my thing. And I've been through some different, let's say, areas of computer science. So I started as a web developer. I've done some back-end developing. I was also a sysadmin for a while. I freelanced a bit. Then I moved to Android development, and that's actually how I started at Doist. So Doist originally was basically a 1-2 person company with a lot of freelancers doing different things. I was one of those freelancers doing the Android app. This didn't work that well for most roles. So eventually Amir, the founder, kind of realized that, if he was ambitious, he was going to actually have to start and build a company and hire people to have more kind of personal investment. And then, we grew from there. So, over time, the Android team grew a bit. It had more people. It needed a leader. I became that leader. The company continued to grow. And at some point, there was a 25 to 30 engineers. And we were kind of struggling to have some, alignment, unified vision, and consolidating things. And that's when the CTO role kind of started making sense. And that's when I jumped to it. So this is a very crude summary of my career.
No, that's awesome. And so when that growth was happening, I hear a lot of people talk about growing pains and how difficult it is to kind of, your product is doing well, you're getting a lot of things, moving, but what is it like to manage the people and get the people in the right seats and handle that growth period?
Yeah, I think, growth is actually very nuanced. So it varies a lot from company to company. So for instance, we at Doist, we're fully distributed, we're fully remote. So we kind of embrace the asynchronous approach to communication and to working. This has a different set of challenges than from most companies, which I guess, might be a bit unique to us. But I think, something that's not unique. So, I guess most companies struggle with this. It's really communication because, when you're just a few people, there's a lot you don't need to communicate. Alignment is almost free, right? You just do things and it works. And as you grow, you start to realize that you need to communicate more. You need to communicate more effectively. You need to kind of work more explicitly in aligning what you are doing and why you are doing what you are doing.
How important is it to state that why and be very clear on the why?
I mean, the why is the reason people follow your ideals. So the why, I would say, is critical. Like the what doesn't matter as much as the why.
Yeah.
Because the why is basically why people will buy into your idea. So it's very important that everybody understands the why and that everybody is able to challenge the why too. Because, many times you're just wrong.
Yeah, I've only had one opportunity to lead a remote team, and they were contractors, so it wasn't really like full employees. Well, what is that like, and how do you motivate a remote team? Like, I know for me, it's easy because I can just say, "Hey, we're going to do a lunch and learn. Let's all get together and hang out." But how do you do that with a remote team?
Yeah, so I think there's a multi-part to this. Looking at the mission we have for Doist as a company and for Todoist and Twist as products, I think actually a lot of this mission helps motivate people because I think we have we're a product-centered organization, and we have, this big mission of kind of like creating the workplace of the future. And we're also building the tools to do this, which, I think by default is a very inspiring message. But also there's a bunch of things we do, obviously, to help with team building and just making everybody feel like part of a unified team. Something everybody loves for obvious reasons, since we work apart all of the year, is that every year we go and spend a full week together. We do some work. We also do some sightseeing. We just spend time together, and then each individual team has another week like this over the year. Off of this, I guess we have a pretty standard setup. So we have weekly team meetings, we have monthly one-on-ones, and so on, and just try to keep that alignment going.
So when you're, I think it's very inspiring to use your own products. And I had a CTO, a long time ago, probably 10 years ago, they used to always say, we're going to eat our own dog food. We're going to use our own products first, and I think that's super inspiring for employees because they have the desire to make things better because it's making things better, not just for them, but also for their customers. And they are their customers,
Yeah. And we definitely embrace this side of things. Like we have this saying internally, which is the best idea wins. Mm-hmm. And the way this materializes is, we try to be as little siloed as possible. And, everybody can share ideas, even if it's not from their specific domain. So, it's very common for developers to criticize designs. It's very common for designers to kind of like challenge developers on things like, why is this hard? Can you kind of like explain to me? So we kind of like, I think, have this very open culture that fosters collaboration and fosters, radical candor between people. And this is like super inspiring environment to work with because being a product-led company, as you said, a lot of people who joined Doist were fans of, either of our products or both in some cases. So, they have a lot of strong opinions about what can be improved and how. And it's, if you're open to this feedback, which I think you should be, it's a very inspiring environment to work with.
Yeah, definitely. And I know from an outsider, looking at your company and your product, I found value just in going through your blogs, honestly. You guys have like some great blog posts about how to onboard remote employees, how to leave a productive life. What are some things you can do, with work-life balance, and just some awesome things that, as a leader or a boss, you kind of want to follow some of these tactics, and your company is not just doing it internally, but you're sharing that externally. And I think that's just an awesome approach.
Yeah, I mean, we try to share as much as we can, and actually, I'm personally very, very proud of our blog and all the people that contribute to it. We usually say that Doist, the company, is also a product, and its product is the way we work, and the way we can kind of like sell this product, not obviously for money, but it's like sharing our experience, sharing our learnings, and just overall sharing how we do things so that it can be helpful to other teams and other companies, especially those trying remote work for the first time and that need guidance on how to navigate. It's very different after all.
Yeah.
So definitely the blog is a big part of that, Doist as a product mentality.
Yeah, and I think it's just awesome because you're right. If you are working on remote teams, I mean, a lot of challenges with managers, my age and older is, we've never managed a remote team. It's difficult to do. We don't really know. We're not as comfortable with it. So how can we do that? And I think, with your tools and also the information you provide about how to lead a remote team is very helpful. What are some of the challenges that you've seen that maybe your blog has helped you guys out with when it comes to onboarding remote employees that, if you don't have a physical office for them to come to and get a sense of the culture, how do you give them that remotely?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are many challenges. I think one where people struggle frequently is the amount of independence that you're kind of like you have, and the amount of like initiative that you're expected to have. The thing is, at least the way we do remote, we do most of our work asynchronously, right? And we don't have any kind of time zone restrictions. And this means you might join a team where there's very little overlap between you and everybody else. So you're kind of like expected to have a lot of ownership over, decision making, over the things that you're working on, over just taking initiative and doing things without having to be, without the work having to be laid out in front of you. And a lot of people struggle with this because, first of all, most companies don't really work like that, and second of all, it's not as tempting to follow this path in a co-located context, right? And even managers struggle with this, I think, because it's basically impossible to do any kind of micromanagement in an environment like this. So you need to really trust your team and focus more on setting goals and long-term vision as a manager, instead of like just trying to locally optimize whatever anyone's doing, because you might just not be online at the same time that they are. So. And this is a big context shift, not only in terms of attitude, but also in terms of tooling. The tooling you can use to help you will be a little bit different if you're working asynchronously and in a trust-based environment.
So let's say I'm an employee and I just got hired. I've never worked remotely before. How do I understand that you guys trust me? Because I'm used to the boss that was a micromanager and doesn't trust me or whatever. Which is not the case where I'm at now. I have a great boss. Let me just throw that out there.
Yeah.
But let's say I came from an environment where I was micromanaged. People always were checking over my back. I never had the freedom to do what I wanted. Now I'm really looking forward to that. That's one of the things that attracted me to this company. I go there, I get the freedom. How do I know you guys really trust me?
All right, so that's a great question. This is something we're always improving, and it's basically the way we approach the onboarding of new people. So we have a lot of content tailored towards this. Internal guidelines. We link to a lot of blog posts. The same blog that you read. That people, when they join, they should kind of like get familiar with. We actually have a whole week just to go over all of this material that explains how we work, what we value, what are our core values. How we practice what we preach, and etc. And on top of this, the team leads spend quite a lot of time tailoring the initial work so that it matches, so that it basically gives you some leeway into adapting to the new way of working. So, for instance, you don't get thrown into a huge project from day one, because you need some breathing room. And for instance, we realize how important it is for you to start shipping things to actual users as quickly as possible. And we also have like a very tight feedback loop, and not only between the person being onboarding and the team lead, but also between our people ops person who has some specialty around specifically onboarding people, and the new candidate and the new employee. And since we, as I said before, we practice radical candor, these feedback sessions, I think they tend to be very helpful for people because we're very explicit about setting expectations, and when anything is not going to a good place, we kind of like bring this up as soon as possible and with as much context as possible, so that it's always very transparent and very clear what the expectations are, what's going well, but also what's not going so well. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's a combination of, providing as much information as we can from the get-go, leaving enough room in the calendar, for instance, the whole full first week, for people to kind of like study and just dive deep into these guidelines. And then, maintaining a very tight feedback loop, which I think is the part where managers sometimes struggle a bit. Kind of like providing feedback too late, or when trust has already been breached, etc.
Yeah. Feedback for me has always been hard. And you mentioned radical candor, and there's a book by Kim Scott with that title. And I don't know if that's where you guys got some of your stuff. But
yeah, for sure. That book was very inspiring for us, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great book. I actually tried to get her on the show, and she told me to hit her up later, and I forgot to follow up. So I need to do that now.
Yeah.
But yeah, but feedback's always been hard for me, and just doing one-on-ones is something that, even as the boss, I'm intimidated to do one-on-ones sometimes with my employees. How is it that you personally have been able to overcome maybe some of the challenges when it comes to giving feedback to an employee?
Yeah. So the way that I've tried to structure this is to do as much preparation as I can to have a one-on-one. So I highly suggest that people don't take one-on-ones lightly. You should spend some time beforehand preparing for them, and that means looking for what topics exactly you want to discuss, build an agenda together with the other person, do some research in these topics, kind of like fundament your ideas, and also ask the other person to do the same. Because when the feedback is both ways, and when you do your best to kind of create this safe environment where feedback is shared not only from you to whoever you're managing, but also from them to you, it becomes much easier to provide the feedback. I think for instance, it's crucial to be vulnerable. And one example I can give of this is we start most of our one-on-ones at Doist with, I don't know if you've heard about it, but there's this red, yellow, green check-in concept that I think is promoted by Reboot. And you basically start the meeting stating what's your, state of mind and exactly why you're in the red or in the yellow or in the green. And it can be a mix of personal and professional reasons. And we try to be, as honest as we can while doing this. So, sometimes we share personal problems. Sometimes we share professional frustrations, things that would not come up in normal conversation, for example. And I do think, this together with preparation sets up the one-on-one for a really nice and insightful conversation in general.
Yeah, I just heard about this when I was at that conference I was talking to you about before we started recording.
Yeah.
I just heard about this when I was up there. I gave a talk on just technical leadership, and I talked about giving one-on-ones and the way that I do it by taking time about 15 minutes before the one-on-one to try to put myself in that person's shoes and go through their perspective of what their day's been like and what they're working on, what their life is like, if they have kids, what go through that process. And then someone said, "Well, have you heard of the red, yellow, green check-in?" And I said, "No, I haven't." This is afterwards. After I talked, and so I looked it up, and I think that's an easy way to kind of speed up that process, because you can know right there, okay, this person's a yellow today because of whatever.
Yeah, and I also think it's a great way it's great from that perspective where you gain information, but also I also see it as a great way to show to the other person that I am, vulnerable, that I am available, because I have problems, I have frustrations. Sometimes I start meetings in the red, right, for various reasons, and I try to be as transparent about these as possible. But there's another side to feedback, which is it's difficult for most people. I would say it's extremely difficult to some people, and since at Doist we work pretty much on a global scale. In some cultures, this becomes more prevalent than in others. And something we also do occasionally, not every month, but it's the start, stop, continue. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's, we basically try to think about feedback for the other person by, picking 2 to 3 things that the person should start doing, 2 to 3 things that the person should stop doing, and 2 to 3 things that the person should continue doing. So although this is not as organic, in terms of just raw feedback, it helps kind of frame and kickstart the process if you're less comfortable with it.
Yeah, no, I have used that before, and that is helpful, especially I think I recommend people doing that when they're new to a team.
Yeah.
And you don't know the people on a personal level yet. You're still trying to learn what they're doing. You can kind of assess where, hey, I'm new here. Can you give me things that I should start doing, things that I should stop doing, things that I should continue to do, in my first 90 days or something like that. And it's a great way for a leader to let other people know that, I trust you to give me feedback. I'm not going to be that manager that doesn't want to hear it. I want to hear all of it. So here's how you do that, and give your team that framework to give you the feedback.
Yep, exactly. And there's also the different personalities in the team, right? There are some people who will want feedback all the time, as often as you can give them, while others will prefer to kind of for example, book a specific meeting for feedback, and then have the other topics kind of like separated from these. So yeah, I think there's also a lot of tailoring going on if you want to be an effective manager, because each person is slightly different, and I do think there's a lot of value in trying to optimize these processes for your peers or the people you are working with.
Yeah, definitely. So when you're doing these with a remote employee, do you use video conferencing or just audio, or how are the one-on-ones typically taking place?
Oh, we definitely do video conferencing with video. I mean, there's a lot of body language that body language is very important, and when you're doing just audio, I think you can miss on a lot of cues that are important. And I mean this both ways, not as the team lead. I mean this goes both ways. So there's a lot of, I think, already quite a bit of signal loss by doing it remotely. But we want as much signal as we can, and that would translate to a video conference, with real time, not only audio but also video.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. I think there's so much that goes on with body language and just the way someone's eyes are looking, if they're looking at you, if they're looking off, if they're engaged or disengaged. You can kind of tell a lot about what's going on. It's not just the words that they say, but how they say it and the reactions, because sometimes they won't say anything, but their face will tell you a whole new story.
Yep. And this does not only helps you consciously, it also, I think, helps you subconsciously, because, we humans, we've evolved over thousands of years reading each other's body language. So, we should never, ever kind of like discredit this.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're looking for an employee, are there some employees that just don't do well remotely, or is that something you think anybody can do? It just takes a little bit of time to adapt?
That's actually a great question, because this is something I think we have matured our way of thinking about this. So we originally thought that pretty much everybody could do remote, and actually it would be better for pretty much everybody if there was enough effort and time put into it. Mm-hmm. But as we've learned, most people do adapt well to working remotely, but we have some we've had experiences where people have struggled a little bit with this. And despite, even in some cases, long-term effort, we have been unable to make it work. And I've stayed in touch with some of these people who eventually left. And some of them are really, really happy working in local companies, with a regular office and regular office peers. So at this point, I would definitely say that onboarding is a big part of it, so making the expectations very clear and also guiding people through these changes, because, it's very different to work from a co-working space or a home in some cases than working in an office. We don't even have, a fixed schedule. So, for example, you're expected to work a few amount of hours per week, but how you kind of like sort that out is up to you. And this can be very complicated for some people, in some cases even destructive. So finding that routine, finding that structure, finding happiness in working remotely comes naturally to some people, but it does not come naturally to others. And for that second group, having a really strong onboarding is really helpful. But I would say at this point that, there's a group of people out there for which I don't think remote work is going to work, at least in the current time of their lives.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think it's just for some people it's hard for them to have their own structure and discipline to do it on their own. But I also found that I've had an employee that was really, whenever they were working remotely, it's like things didn't get done and they had trouble focusing. So we just set up a schedule and said, I know you have the freedom to create your own, but for the next 2 months, let's try it to where you will connect to our VPN or wherever we're connecting to. Mm-hmm. You'll be online on our chat software of whatever choice we were having at the time, and you'll be available between this hour and this hour, and that's just the way we're going to do it for a period of time. And they did so much better. And for me, it's the same way. If I'm ever at home working, I know that I've got to sit down. I got to go to a certain room, and it's my work room. If I'm not in that room, it's not going to get done because I'm not disciplined enough to do it sitting on the couch. I've got to get up and go somewhere.
I can definitely see that. And that's exactly like one of the things that we were talking about before. Everybody's different and we have to be mindful of this. So, if I use my example, for instance, I feel like I'm generally very energy based. So I don't have much structure at all. And I do enjoy the possibility of working when I feel the most motivated. So, this means that there are days where I wake up and I don't feel like doing anything right now. And I kind of don't do anything for a few hours and then make up for that in some other time when I'm full of energy. The kind of the regular work schedule to me personally feels a bit like artificially limiting. And I mean, this is one of the great things about remote work, right? Like we can have a schedule, but we can also not have a schedule and kind of try to optimize for what makes us happy and what makes us productive.
Yeah, definitely. And if you go back to Tom, I can't believe Dan Pink, that name just left me. Dan Pink's book, Drive, he talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose as kind of like the three motivators. And I feel like you guys, by using your own products and allowing people to have more freedom, you're giving them the autonomy and purpose right there. And just as long as you give them the opportunity to get better at the skills that they're working on and create great products, then you have all three.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, autonomy is a huge part of working at Doist, and it's also a huge part of working remotely, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like your team is, a lot of entrepreneurial-minded folks. Do you ever find that to be challenging to manage, or is that more of an easier task because you can kind of just give them the vision, the direction, and then get out of the way?
Yeah, it's both, I think. Yeah. So I think in the long term, we usually end up with better execution and better plans, better execution because of just how, entrepreneurship oriented these folks are. But sometimes we struggle a little bit, for instance, with decision making because I guess, this is something we are still growing. We're a little over 70 people now, but we were 20 just, 3 to 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we are, jumping out of consensual decision making is something we have struggled with a little bit in a few instances, and that can be problematic because if you have product-minded people, passionate people, they will obviously have strong opinions. But if you have a large crowd, there's a very high chance that these opinions will be different from one another. So you easily, you spend a lot of time and energy discussing something that leads you nowhere, basically. Mm-hmm. So we're still kind of exploring a great approach to decision making that is not consensual, but still leaves room for all of those concepts we discussed before, such as the best idea wins, right? So it's non-trivial. I think it's a non-trivial challenge because we want our culture to remain open and where anybody can challenge any idea. But it does lead to some complications, and I think consensus is one of the bigger challenges that we face.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think. I know for me, I actually majored in entrepreneurship, believe it or not, back years ago before I switched over to computer science because I wanted to, have my own company. I wanted to do that. And I found the more I got into it, the more I think the entrepreneurial mindset is an advantage for employees to have. And I encourage my team to do things on the side, to think like you're an owner. That's one of our items in our code, is to think like an owner and to approach things as if you own the company, and how would you do it if you own the company. I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, there's that saying where you want your hires to be the next CEOs. So I mean, obviously that's taken a little bit to the extreme, but I think it's a very good approach to the exact same thing you were just saying. You want your team to be, I guess, very opinionated and very autonomous.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the most challenging thing that you've had to do when it comes to the growth that you guys have had? I mean, you've doubled in size over the past few years. You're working remotely. You're using your own products, which, is good and could be a challenging thing, too, when you're testing new features and, making sure that you're not just building things for you, but also for your customers. What do you think the most challenging aspect of leading that kind of environment is?
You mean for me personally or for us as a whole?
How about both? Let's go with you personally.
Okay. So for me personally, transitioning from being an individual contributor into managing a team and just my success being indirect success, it was I would say very challenging. So I always appreciated the creative side of software engineering, being able to create, being able to build things. to being able even fixing a bug was something that's always been very exciting for me. It's very easy to create value as a software engineer. You have a bunch of quick wins over the days, over the weeks. Like, it's basically filled with very obvious wins, very obvious rewards. While when you become a manager, I think it becomes much less obvious what the rewards are and how long they take. Because you can make a lot of investment over a lot of very long period of time, and the reward might be very far off into the future, and even then, it might not be that obvious. Mm-hmm. So, I do think that's a very challenging transition from creating value directly to empowering a team to create that value, and just in the end getting out of the way. So for me personally, I think that transition was very tough, and it's something I don't struggle as much anymore. But from time to time, I still feel it.
Yeah.
For us as a team, I mentioned consensus before. I still think this is a very relevant problem. It also very specific to our culture, but also. I would like to kind of bring up two more things, which I think are challenging with growth. One of them is, fighting complexity. So, when you're just a few people, everything is very simple. And we talked about communication before, but there's more. You get a support ticket about a bug, and what you do is, you go into the code, you fix, you commit, push, and eventually, if you have CI and CD, the customer gets the fix, and that's it. While when you're a lot more people and you have these more obvious responsibilities, you have things. You have backlogs. You have you have basically a lot of tooling and a lot of processes that make things work. And in some instances, this complexity is not very justified. So it's kind of, complexity is easy to add, but it's hard to remove. And so, just staying vigilant and being skeptical about, do we really need these things? I think it's something that's challenging because, as you grow, just throwing complexity at the problem or just picking the most complex tool for a specific problem, it's just a very easy thing to make. And then you'll be paying the cost for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Todd Henry in his book, Accidental Creative. He said, that there's a huge value in making the complex seem simple. And if you can simplify things, it's a value that just doesn't happen just once, but it's a repeated value. It grows exponentially.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, I think, a very tough problem because you will feel this pain, and the pain will be very real. The solution itself sometimes will not be as obvious. Like, why should you pick something simple where there is a risk that the problem is not actually solved versus, just picking something very complex where that problem will be solved. You'll just not know about the other problems that will surface because of this.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Well, man, I really appreciate it, and I think this insight's been awesome. Is there anything else you want to add about leadership and making that change from individual contributor to manager or anything like that you think would be helpful for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth trying. So this would be my advice. Like, if you work in a company and you have a chance to lead a small team, even if just temporarily, for instance, imagine a feature squad and you have the opportunity to lead that for over a few months, I would definitely encourage people to do it and to try it out and see if they like. Because, I think there's a lot of black and white sometimes in the sense that, some people want to become leaders and they don't even know what leadership is about, while others kind of dismiss the role entirely without ever trying it out. So I would just, recommend that people take some risks and figure out what works for them and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100% because you never know if you're going to like it or not. And to add to that, I think maybe stick with it for a little bit because I hated it at first. And now it's like my life's passion,
Yeah, definitely. You need a proper time to kind of figure out that is this for me. There's a lot. I must say there's a lot of imposter syndrome, I think, in the beginning. And the more I talk to leaders, the more I notice this is not a problem specific to me. It's quite widespread. In the beginning, you're kind of learning the ropes, and it's normal to feel like you don't know much about what you're doing, and you have a lot to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned imposter syndrome, and that's 100% accurate because I know for me, and even still today, I've been leading teams for more than a decade, and I still feel like it's just a matter of time before either my boss or HR walks in and says, hey, time's up.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much we don't know and so much we still have to learn, right? And dealing with people is such a nuanced thing that, it's so different, for instance, from software development where there's a lot of objective things. So, yeah, it becomes a lot more subjective, a lot more nuanced. And I think it's normal that things are not as black and white. So it kind of like makes us insecure, for sure.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate having you on. How can people find out more about Doist and connect with you or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, so I would recommend that people go to doist.com, visit our website. We have some content there about the team and how we work. We also have the blog. It's linked from the site as well. We build 2 products. So we build Todoist. It's todoist.com. It's basically a productivity app tailored for individuals, but also small teams. And we build twist.com. That's a communication app focused on asynchronous, thoughtful, long-form communication, also for teams. It's basically what we use to run the whole company. And yeah, I mean, for me personally, I'm not very strong on social media, but I'm on Twitter. I'll maybe share my handle afterwards because it's a little hard to say, but it's basically my name with an S in the middle. So
yeah, I'll link it up on the show notes.
Yeah, that's probably easier to do. That's definitely where I'm the most active, and my even direct messages are open. So if people have questions, please feel free to ping me directly if that's something, if it's easier for you than doing it in public.
Awesome. And I'm going to link up Doist and stuff in the show notes so people can get that from geekleader.com. And again, thank you so much for being on the show. I've learned a lot about remote work and bringing people on board and doing one-on-ones, and it's just been very eye-opening for me, and I'm sure it has been for our audience. So thank you so much.
And thank you so much for having me, for inviting me. It's been, it's been great, and I actually followed the show for a few years now. So it's very, I can cross that off my bucket list.
Well, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Special thanks again to our sponsor, Splashtop. And again, you can find out a lot more about their products. You can get 20% off and a free month trial by going to geekleader.com/Splashtop. And don't forget, they are the premier solution for remote access, remote support, any kind of remote access that you need for your computers. Splashtop is the company to go to. Again, I've been using them for 7 years. Love the product, love their service, love their support. Their team is awesome over there. Check them out at geekleader.com/Splashtop.